Okay, students, we've been talking about learning styles, and for your activity this week, you're going to be taking a learning styles inventory to determine your learning style, your preferred manner for processing information. So, a lot of times, students take that learning style inventory and they say, okay, cool, Dr. Bean, I know my learning style, and they let it end with that. But please don't let it stop there. The point of knowing your learning style is to then be able to identify learning strategies that match with the type of learner you are. So depending on your learning style, depending on the learning style preference, there are actually different strategies that you can use to become the very best student that you can be. So please make sure that you check the handout, like the one I have on the screen, that gives you some strategies, also a video that I've posted. But please don't stop there. Go ahead and do your own research to investigate some new strategies that you might be able to use to actually tap into your own learning style. And again, if you're using a strategy that complements how you learn, you're going to be getting more quality learning done during your actual study time. Now, in addition to your learning style, you also need to be aware of your study environment, your actual physical study environment. So we can define study environment as the physical environment in which we learn, in which we study, in which we process information. And there are all sorts of factors in the environment that can affect our learning style. And we're going to talk about some of them, like time of day, food and drink, light and sound, temperature, the comfort level, the structure of the time or the task, how mobile you can be, your posture, and so forth. So taken individually, these factors actually do make a difference, but when taken collectively, they have a potential to make a huge difference in the quality of your study time. So the more quality time you invest, obviously the more of a return on your investment that you're going to be getting here in college. So one of the very first study environment considerations deals with when you study, the time of day. So whenever possible, you should schedule the most challenging courses and also your most intense study sessions during the time of day when you are most alert, when you're most productive. So you actually need to ask yourself, are you a morning person, an afternoon person, or an evening person? And it doesn't matter which one you are, but whatever you are, it means that you're more alert and you're more productive at that time of day. So make sure you schedule accordingly if it's at all possible. So for me, guys, I am definitely an early morning person. I'm also actually a late night person, but I am not at all an afternoon person. So when it comes to my most challenging tasks, my most challenging courses where my brain really needs to be focused and alert, I usually schedule things early morning or late in evening. Afternoon, I tend to get sleepy, unmotivated, and more nap-like. And so I'm not saying I don't ever do anything in the afternoon time, but I don't schedule the most intensive things I have to do for the afternoon. Another consideration you need to make when you're considering your study environment is the presence or the absence of food and drink. Have you eaten before you start studying? Have you had breakfast, lunch, dinner? Have you had a snack? Do you have the energy from food sources to do your studying? Or have you eaten too much and you need a nap? Do you like to eat when you study? Or does eating while you study serve as a distraction? You got the old Cheetos fingers. Do you like to use food and drink as a reward after you've studied? So it doesn't matter what the answer is, just know what works for you and stick with it, okay? For me, I don't like eating beforehand because I get sleepy, I get unmotivated. So actually being a little hungry is a source of motivation for me. It actually pushes me. Sometimes I like to have like a small fruit snack on a break. Sometimes I might have some fruit snacks while I'm studying, a little bit of a tactile experience, but mostly I use food as a reward when I'm finished with the task at hand. So another consideration of your study environment would be light and sound. And when it comes to lighting, you have to ask, well, what type of lighting helps you study best? Natural light, artificial light, bright light, muted light, soft light, direct light, indirect light, all sorts of choices, okay? But do keep in mind that poor lighting, bad lighting, is a chief cause of eye strain and also headaches, especially among college students. So when we have improper lighting, it actually also leads to fatigue. When you study, make sure that the coverage of your materials is even and you don't have shadows or glare. That can actually cause a lot of eye strain and fatigue as well. Now, not so much in the RGV, but research does show that people sometimes become depressed, a little bit unmotivated because of light deprivation, especially during those winter months when the light angle is lower. Now, this is more true in northerly environments, in Midwest and so forth, but it can also happen in the valley during some of our months like in January and February. So if you're one of those people, make sure that you try to study and spend as much time as possible in places that are highly lit. Again, either natural or artificial light, but highly lit. Another study shows that our reading ability can actually be affected by what is called light contrast, and that's between the print and the paper color. So high contrast is when you have black letters on white paper, typically what comes out of our printers, right? And some people find it easier to read that black print, not on bright white paper, but on blue or kind of gray recycled paper, which has less contrast and is actually easier on our eyes. So definitely consider that. Now, sound also plays a role, and you have to ask yourself, do you study best in absolute silence and quiet? Do you like a little bit of noise, a little bit like a fan running, or do you like more like some kind of music or some kind of a lot of noise, I guess I would say, in the background? Now, research has actually shown that if you do choose to study with music, which is perfectly acceptable depending on the type of music. And research shows that you should choose Baroque classical music because that tempo and instrumentation really seems to be the most compatible with learning and studying. Now, you can listen to other kinds of music, especially instrumentational music, but lyrical music is actually frowned upon because it can actually be distracting when you're trying to process, especially reading or something like that. Talking is also generally distracting, so you want to try to minimize the amount of, chatter that is audible from wherever it is that you're studying. Another consideration, of course, is temperature, and I always feel like Goldilocks when I talk about this slide. Do you study best when it's colder, warmer, average, just right? And of course, while you can't always control the temperature in a room, definitely an awareness of your preference, whether you like it cool or a warm environment, because you can dress in layers, so you can obviously adjust to differences in like a classroom or in a testing environment. So just choose to study in the environment where you feel most comfortable. So for me, for example, when I especially remember when I was in college, I like to study outside quite a bit, but of course there are environmental factors, like sometimes the sun can get too intense, so you move to the patio and the breeze can be too much. But if the environment works for you and is conducive, like hearing the birds chirp and so forth, do that. Other people like to be more in their own homes, and if it's a little cool, they put on a blanket or so forth, but just figure out what works for you and do that. Try to eliminate anything that causes a distraction. Another consideration is your own posture and the degree of mobility. And so some people, of course, prefer to sit at a table or a desk, and that's a formal posture, and this helps them concentrate and study. I'm definitely one of those people. Other people like to learn by being a little bit more comfortable, like maybe on a sofa or lying down on the floor a bit. This is called an informal posture. Others actually need to move about to learn. So the girl that you see on the treadmill there, kinesthetic, tactile learners tend to like this, so like reading while walking could be appropriate for them. Wouldn't work for me, I'm too much of a klutz. But your environment, guys, should be comfortable but not too comfortable. And here research tells us that slight amounts of muscular tension actually increases our efficiency and accuracy in mental work. So the more comfortable we are, maybe the less effective the environment is. So a little bit of muscular tension. Also, I want you to think about the amount of movement in your study area. So if you're studying in a major traffic path, let's say you're in a college dorm and you're in near a hallway, or you're at the library but you're near an aisle and there are people passing, or you're at home and you're studying at the kitchen table and there's a lot of activity going on in the kitchen, those things can be very distracting because you're watching the passing scenery or paying attention to whatever's going on at hand. So try to avoid those places where there's a lot of movement in and around you. Now, I always get the question about studying in bed, and you can guess the answer to this one. Remember, I just said that you want to be comfortable but not too comfortable. So the human body, of course, gets trained to behave in a certain way based on the environment it's in. So when you're in bed, the environment is telling your body that what? It's time to go to sleep, and you probably will. So I do not recommend studying in bed. It's just a little too comfortable. Now, in relationship to the study environment, there's also something called persistence, and we have high persistence people and low persistence people. Generally, when you hear the word high, it's good, right? High grades, high performance. But in this case, actually, it is better to be low persistent when we're referring to your study environment. And basically, high persistence people mean they can sit there in that study environment and they persist for a long period of time without deviating from that position, from sitting there, from processing, from working. But the low persistent people are ones that work in that location and then take a break and then come back, okay? And research has shown actually that low persistence is better. Breaks are important because they actually stimulate our minds, so we should definitely strive to be low persistence. And I'm going to share with you on the next screen why that happens. Okay, so I just said it's good to be low persistence, it's best to take breaks, it's best to distribute your learning. So don't try to learn things all at once. You could even consider that cramming to an extent. And it's often said from research that we as human beings tend to remember the first and the last items in a series. We tend to remember what we study at the beginning and what we study at the end. We tend to remember the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes. We also tend to remember, obviously, things anywhere that they occurred in the study session. If they're actually stimulating, interesting, funny, ridiculous, outlandish, we can visualize them. They have some application in our lives, okay? So let's say we have two students, and you can see them on the screen on the left and the right, and they both have 2 hours to study. The one on the left decides they're going to be high persistence, and they're going to sit down and they're going to study for those 2 hours, for those 120 minutes. But what happens is, because we tend to remember the first chunk of information and the last chunk of information, the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes of that entire 120-minute study session, they're remembering like 20 to 30 minutes of what they actually went over. But the other student on the right, they also have 2 hours, but they say, I'm going to go about it in a different way. I'm going to be low persistence, and I'm going to study for 20 minutes and then take a 10-minute break, study for 20, take a 10-minute break, study for 20, take a 10-minute break, study for 20. So in each of those 20-minute study sessions, they're tending to remember the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes, which is the entire study session. So they're remembering all 20 minutes, then they take a break, and then they resume again. So they're actually studying, of that 120 minutes, they're studying 20, 40, 60, 80 minutes, and they're remembering what? All 80 minutes. So the moral of the story is, guys, that breaks allow us to integrate information and relax a little bit before beginning with more information. And so by integrating the information in this way, we actually cut down on the studying time while we're actually increasing our effectiveness. So definitely take breaks. Okay, so now that we've talked about the factors that actually might affect the quality of your study environment, I do want you guys to consider doing a little bit of analyzing of the top study environments, of the places you currently study. And so I want you to rank them in terms of like their pros and their cons. I even would like you to consider going to some of these online study environment quizzes. You can find them online, and they actually help you determine the best and the worst locations for you to study. And so once you know this and you've acknowledged it, I want you to try to make an effort to actually adjust your current study environment, or use your best location, because you want results, right? So why pick a less than optimal environment to study? Make some changes, and hopefully then you'll see your results in your productivity, efficiency, effectiveness, and obviously in your grades, and the most important thing, in your learning.